With your permission, I will leave the floor for the trainers, for the ones who really know what they do.
That was an excellent introduction because everything I understood. Actually, you told me the whole presentation in English before we got started this morning. So this is going to be a little bit of instruction time, and then, as I said, over the course of the time, we're going to get more discussion and more activity. One of the principles that I have about learning is that we have the opportunity to learn only when we have the opportunity to participate. A little bit of instruction is a good thing, but we, particularly adults, and it's actually true for children as well, we really learn by activity. So my job is to set up a few discussion items this morning, and then to gradually turn it over to you to use those ideas in your work, both in terms of general policy and in terms of the specific policies that you're creating for higher education. Need these things here, excuse me. And so let me begin with obviously what we are about. As Radu has said, we want to understand the methodology, and I'm going to read slides because I realize that I wrote these in my native language and they're not in your native language, so if you'll excuse me, I'll just generally do this. The methodology of public policy analysis and or strategic analysis, and understand the use of scenarios in public policy as well to deliver competencies, designing policy proposals and impact studies. These are quotes from the RFP, which the team put out, and of course, which we responded to. So that's basically, so policy development in general, future studies. Obviously, and we'll talk more about it later this morning, but policy is an attempt to change the future. And there's two important words there, change and future. And I have to begin by apologizing that your teachers probably, I don't think, ever told you about change. And they probably never told you about the future. As I said, I went to school, I got every degree that American education could offer, and hardly ever, if ever, anybody used the word future, and rarely talked about change. And so first of all, this morning, what I'd like to do is to share with you some very general ideas about change and about the future, particularly about describing and forecasting the future, which is what the scenario process is about. So that's really the first two items on the agenda, a model of change and strategic forecasting using scenarios. That's our primary purpose. The most important part of the morning comes right in here, and that's the coffee break. Okay. And then I will ask my colleague Rumiana to share her transition from strategic foresight, which is what we do in general, to policy development specifically. And the rest of the morning then we'll spend doing a very detailed analysis of what a policy is, what all its parts are, how to go about creating a policy, what some of the theories of policy development happen to be, and that's this whole process here, the ideal process and other theoretical models. Then the most important part of the day comes with lunch downstairs, and we begin into actually applying these theories to your work in higher education. Some of you I know are part of the panels in which they're developing policies. That's great. Some of you may not be part of panels, but you have great ideas about policies for higher education. So in the afternoon, we will take the morning ideas and apply them to the policy process for higher education. As Radu said, not to finish the work by any means, but to practice the concepts and the ideas so that you can talk to your colleagues about those and raise questions and issues. Because after today, Rumiana and I are not here. So we have to kind of leave you on your own to then go and complete this part of the process. So that's basically, this afternoon we'll map the system of higher education, and finally then we will apply what we've learned to your work in the panel. How's that for the day? All right? Any questions about that before we get started? I can't change this anyway, so. All right, so if your teachers probably didn't talk very much about change, and I almost positive they never talked about the future, we learn to think about the future nevertheless. And we learn to think about the future in 3 different ways. The first way we learned to think about the future was in science class. You know, the scientific method is very well established the last 200 or 300 years, in which scientists will make a prediction, and then they will go and observe to see whether the prediction turns out to be true. If it's true, their theory may be correct. If it's false, they have to come back and revise their theory, but after a while, through continual revision, they get a very good theory, and they are able to make excellent predictions. So we can predict pendulums and ice cubes, we can predict the phases of the moon, we can predict many, many things about biology and ecology and all of those things. And so we say, oh, therefore the future must be predictable. We must be able to predict the future, except when we get to predicting the future where people are involved. As you know, people are very unpredictable. It's very hard to predict markets and elections and fashion, new technologies and new products. Very, very difficult to predict. And so we have 2 sets of phenomena. One is the physical world, physics and chemistry and astronomy and most of biology. And the other is the human world, economics and political science and sociology and anthropology, which is of course the world that we're most interested in. The phases of the moon 50 years from now is not very exciting nor very useful, but what technologies will be around 50 years from now, well, there's something that we would really like to know, but for which we do not have that. But we also learned in another way that the future was not predictable. We learned in history class. Because when we study history, the way people teach history, they teach it as a series of people and events that make for interesting stories. So we focus on the unusual things, not the ordinary people usually or things which are constant, but we focus on great people and inventions and wars and leaders and all of those things. But we realize that all of those are contingent, meaning they're dependent on very, very small things. So if a person is not born, wow, history changes. Or if somebody has an accident early in life, history changes. And that, of course, is totally unpredictable. Of course, now we're confused. One subject tells us that the future is predictable, and another subject tells us that the future is not predictable. Wow. So the fact that we do not talk much about the future, or we are not comfortable talking about the future, is not a surprise. Because we don't know. Should we predict it? Should we not? Is it predictable? Is it not? And we in Future Studies have resolved that problem, and I'll give you the answer in just a moment. But before that, we have a third way of thinking about the future, not so much from school, but sometimes from our teachers, but mostly from our parents or our ministers. And every motivational speaker that we ever went to hear basically says, you can have any future you want. You're in charge of your future. Whatever you choose to set your goal and work hard for it, and you can have that future. Well, now we've got 3 ways. Is the future out there, predictable or not? Or am I in control of my future? Do I make choices, and do I change the future? So not only do we have 3 ways of understanding the future, we actually have 2 ways. We actually have 3 ways. And we're very, very confused now. We'll see when we get past this model of change that we have a different way of thinking about it, and I will hold off, just so I keep your attention and keep the suspense. I'll hold off giving the answer about how we resolve these 3 issues in just a moment.